The Cybernetic Approach video, a sequel to the book, The Search for the Perfect Swing. Welcome to the Cybernetic Approach. This is part 7. The par formula and the indifference curves. Now that you know your average distance and dispersion distribution with every club, you are in a position to calculate the actual contribution of each stroke on a given hole. All golf shots cost you 1 stroke on your scorecard, but not all contribute the same to your game. Here is how to calculate the actual value of each shot you make. The Search for the Perfect Swing study discovered a universal formula for finding the fractional par value of any hole according to its total distance. The formula has a fixed component and a variable component. The fixed component for par at any hole is always 2.35 plus the variable component. And the variable component is the number of yards of the hole multiplied by 0.0044. If we apply this formula, standard par 3 measurement is 147 yards. A standard par 4, 375 yards. And a standard par 5, 602 yards. This explanation is much easier using an example. Remember, you can pause the video and look at the graph in more detail. Now, let's say you are on hole number 6. For illustration purposes, it has got 375 yards from the blue tees and it's a par 4 both on paper and from its length. If you hit a driver 228 yards into the center of the fairway, the remaining distance of 147 yards to the center of the green becomes exactly a par 3 from that spot. Should you play the hole another day and hit a driver and it travels 260 yards, it makes a better contribution than the previous one. How much better? The first drive you cost you 1 stroke on the scorecard and gave you 228 yards. The other driver cost you 1 stroke and gave you 260 yards. To calculate its contribution, you calculate the par for the remaining distance and subtract that from 4, which is the par for that hole. The 115-yard par you will be facing for the second shot has a difficulty of 2.35, the component which is constant, plus 0.506, which is what you get from multiplying 115 yards times 0.44 thousandths, for a total of 2.86 instead of the 3 strokes remaining from a 228-yard driver. That means your excellent second shot the second time around contributed 1.144 strokes instead of only 1.0. Another dramatic lesson is, let's say you have a par 4 hole 375 yards long. It has a water hazard on the left. If you hit the ball into the hazard at 228 yards from the tee, your tee shot would have cost you 1 stroke, but its contribution was exactly 0. The reason is that a ball resting in the pond describes a par 4 from that location. You have to drop to the fairway with a penalty stroke and still have a par 3 to finish the hole. A similar fate awaits you when your driver ends up behind a large tree. The contribution could amount to 0. Here is a picture showing average expected scores depending on where your ball lies on the rough, however close to the green it may be. Now I'm going to borrow a term from economics when I talk about the indifference curves you have to plot for your strategy. To plan your game, you have to get a map of the course and plot your stepping stone strategy. The indifference lines. They are stepping stones that give you your previous shot exactly the same value. How far you expect your drive to go. There is a line that marks all the lies you reach with a driver that have exactly the same degree of difficulty. These I call the indifference curves. You do the same for the second shot and then the third on a par 5 if needed. Only those needed to reach the green. You will see if it is really a par 4 for your game level, or it could be a par 3.8 or a par which is 4.3 according to your personal golfing ability. Keep this in mind. If your ball goes into the rough, as shown here on the orange, the British study says, on average, it adds about a quarter of a stroke to your expected score. So, it would be the equivalent of a ball being 60 yards further back in the fairway. Please note that the average score from the rough for a professional is equivalent to playing from the fairway 40 to 60 yards farther. This forces you to study how long a driver you're capable of hitting and still keep it on the short grass, so you don't have to pay an extra 1/4 of a stroke for risking the rough. For amateur players, the cost of playing from the rough could be even closer to 4/10 of a stroke, and a greater distance sacrifice would still be in order. This explains why very short but very straight hitters can play in the low 80s. Their approach from the center of the fairway, some 20 or 30 or 40 yards back, can still allow them to be putting for par half of the time from inside 15 or 20 feet. It is always good to have a predetermined bailout zone ready in case you hit a bad driver. In addition to knowing on average how far you hit with every club in the bag, you have to figure out where your 2-putt limit is on the green. This standard gives you an idea of what kind of driver and approach shot you need to play for par. So in addition to your woods and irons, you have to calculate your own 2-putt average distance. This is the spot where you make the same amount of 1-putts as 3-putts, and all the rest 2-putts. Add them all up and you get exactly a 2-putt average. This information takes a practice session in a putting green. Start at a medium distance and go out in 5-yard increments till you start 3-putting. Find the middle ground where 1-putt and 3-putts cancel each other out. Now calculate the average scores on each hole you play. You make pars and the same number of birdies as bogeys. That is exactly a par for your ability. Keep a record of your play on each hole and work out your average. This average helps you plan all your shots. Now let's see how all this translates into optimizing your practice sessions.